Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to another in our webinar series. Today, I am very delighted to be joined by our Head of Global Research, Elena Magrini. Good afternoon, Elena. How are you?
Hello, Ben. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, because I'm talking about one of my favourite subjects, which is how to identify employer demand for higher technical and postgraduate qualifications. So I currently lead our Europe and UK customer success teams. My background is education, and my role is to make sure that we provide the very best possible service to our clients, particularly in that education space, which is what we'll be talking a little bit more about. But Elena, do you want to introduce yourself and explain your role?
Sure, thanks, Ben. And basically, I deal with everything data and research related at Lightcast, especially in a European and UK context. So I focus on doing research with our customers on different questions related to the labor market and help them navigate labor market changes and understand the future of work.
Absolutely fantastic, and what a great job you do with that. I think this is a subject that we've had many conversations about, so I'm delighted that we're both talking about this this afternoon. Just a quick reminder during today's webinar that if you do have any questions, any comments, please pop them in the chat box that will be available should be available on the right hand side of the screen for you. And we'll do our very best at the end of the session to answer those questions. If we need to kind of do a bit of research offline, we will, but we will definitely come back to anyone with any questions. So today's agenda, as well as the topic, we're going to kind of split this into kind of different bits. So first and foremost, I'll talk a little bit about Lightcast. People maybe on the call that are not familiar with what we do. So I'll talk a little bit about the company, what we do, and how we support our education, government, and our company clients across the globe. We'll talk a little bit more about today's topic. Why does that matter? Why is it important that we talk about skills and qualification demand? What does the data say? So Elena will talk us through some examples of data. We'll talk about practical implications for practitioners. So basically conclusions and recommendations of what we need to be looking at moving forward. And then at the end, I've got a couple of webinars and a few resources just to kind of talk you through that are coming in the future in the next few weeks, or some that are even live now. So the first thing around Lightcast is, our mission as a company is to unlock new possibilities in the labour market. We are the global leader in terms of job posting and skills data. And what we do really is, as part of what Elena does, is we look at the research, market research and insight into our education world, our government world, and our company's world. And we also provide software within platforms like Analyst and Career Coach, for example, that allows our clients in those three worlds to really unlock labour market insight, skills insight, alumni insight, and employer demand. So we operate currently across the entire globe. We're headquartered in the United States. We have offices in Idaho, and we have premises in Boston. We're also got offices in the UK, United Kingdom, offices in Milan, where Elena and the data science team are based out of, and offices in India and in New Zealand, and we operate across all those sectors as well. So in terms of us as a company, like I say, our kind of 6 key offerings really is around structural LMI. So that's official statistics that we get from different governments that allow us to start to understand what the building blocks of those local labour markets look like. And we overlay that with job postings that we capture, and we use our bots to be able to capture that and look at online hiring activity, job posting demand, real-time insights around what employers are wanting and skills demand. We have professional profiles. So we have profile data in several countries now that gives us an idea of what the current job market looks like, how that matches up to employer demand. I mentioned a second ago, we have software. So we have lots of platforms like Analyst, like Career Coach, eImpact, Gazelle. These are a few different software offers that we have. And within that software, we've got lots of different workflows and reports that allow clients to very easily navigate through key intelligence data around jobs, skills, industries. We also provide data directly through API and Snowflake integrations. Lots of clients in the United Kingdom and the US and the rest of the world that prefer to utilize that data directly. And last but certainly not least is applied research. What Elena and our colleagues in the research and economics team. So that's where we work with clients on dedicated research projects as well. So that's a little bit about Lightcast, what we do and how we can help lots of different organizations look at insight and research. What we're going to look at now is today's topic. So this is really a kind of big conversation piece, not just in the UK, but really across most of the Western economy and developed world, is understanding what that employer demand for higher technical and postgraduate qualifications is. And education providers are constantly under pressure to really show the value of education, whether it's graduate outcomes, whether it's prolonged destinations into sustained work, apprenticeship successful destinations within a timely manner. The challenge around that is that business and education don't always speak the same language. Employers predominantly speak the language of skills and immediate job need. That doesn't always naturally and easily translate into qualifications. If we think in the UK alone, within the Department for Education's kind of learner aim database, we've got about 70,000 qualifications. We've got over 700 apprenticeship standards after the apprenticeship reform. We've got thousands of undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. So it's really difficult for employers to navigate what that means. So what does a degree mean? What does a level 4 higher national certificate or diploma mean in terms of skills? And so the big question is there a way to bridge this gap? Now, thankfully, I believe there is, and Elena believes there is as well. And so we've got some data to kind of talk through. But before I hand over to Elena to talk about the data, I just wanted to say why it matters. And I think the important thing is within the UK skills policy space, over the last 10 years, we've seen a real renewed and dedicated focus around higher technical education. We've seen the apprenticeship reform. We've seen the introduction of the levy. We've seen the rollout of devolution, particularly around adult skills. T-levels are now a thing that are kind of rolled out. We've talked about advanced British standard potentially in the future, the development of higher and degree apprenticeships, and the lifelong learning entitlement. So the continued rollout of that, particularly if we focus on the adult education training side of it, across England, is really starting to think about how do we serve that current workforce? Because a lot of policy is kind of leading us towards where degrees lead to higher technical qualifications, level 3 qualifications. But we also need to not forget that 80% of the current workforce, 80% of the 2030 workforce is actually already in work now. And ultimately that matters in terms of being able to understand what the current skills need is. And that's a frustration that we hear from employers when we do our work through our combined authority clients, through employer forums, is that they want to talk about the here and now. It's all well and good having a strategy around what happens in the next 10, 15, 20 years. We've still got a lot of people in work that potentially could upskill. And so unpicking this from an employer skills perspective, when really skills demand does not necessarily always equal qualification demand, is the real key, I think, to understanding that. So what employers want versus how that translates into qualifications. So I'll just hand over now to Elena to move on and start to have a look at a bit of the data and really kind of understand what we can show you in terms of skills demand. So over to you, Elena.
Thank you, Ben. And I think I'm going to start straight from your endpoint, the fact that employers and education providers don't often speak the same language because there's a lot of emphasis on skills from the employer's point of view, and education providers obviously talk about qualifications. So I just wanted to focus a little bit more on what do employers actually talk about and what are their main challenges right now. And this is something that we see in the UK context, in the European context, but also more widely in many advanced economies. Employers face very acute talent and skills challenges. 75% of companies actually mention that they face very acute skills challenges. And we know that the landscape is changing very rapidly. So the pace of change that we are seeing in today's labor market is unprecedented. And this means that a lot of the occupations and of the jobs are changing rapidly. So even within the same job, the job looks very different to what it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So it's not just the type of jobs being in demand in the labor market is changing, but also the nature of the job is changing. And employers refer to this talking about skills in many different ways. It could be skills challenges, it could be some particular skills. They talk about green skills or AI skills, for example. And and so there is a lot of pressure to try and address these acute talent and skills challenges. But the thing is, as Ben alluded to, employers have this challenge, but they do not articulate it in terms of skills. They do not articulate it in terms of qualifications, but rather they talk about skills. So just putting a stat out there based on the job postings data that we analyzed. This is based on over 80 million job postings in the UK collected since 2012. And this percentage that you see here on the screen is based on the last 4 months of data, so the first 4 months of 2024. And in 79% of all the job postings collected in the UK over this time period, there is no mention whatsoever of any educational requirements. So employers don't focus on education qualifications. Does this mean that they don't value qualification? Absolutely not. This is not what this means. Part of the reason why we see this number is because in certain fields, qualifications are so implicit to the roles that employers don't even mention them in the job postings. And so if you think about, for example, a doctor, working in an hospital, you can't be a doctor or a GP without having a degree related to medicine. So it's just so implicit in the job that the employers don't even mention it anymore. In other cases, this number is just an actual representation, genuine representation of employers' need. There are many jobs in the economy that actually do not require any specific qualification, and that somebody with, we know of a lot of people, a lot of workers that work in a specific field that maybe have a degree, but it's in a completely unrelated field to the ones they're operating into. Or it could be that some jobs actually don't require any qualification whatsoever, not even anything that is at level 1 or level 2. The other reason behind this number is that when employers recruit, they tend to tap into specific roles. They want to fill some specific roles. And normally the shortages around these roles are related to specific skills. And so it's something, let's call it small. It's not small in the sense that it's not important, but it's a piece of the puzzle that are missing. Whereas qualifications provide a holistic approach at equipping people with a range of knowledge, skills, and abilities that is beyond perhaps the mere specific skill that an employer needs. And also on the other side, on a recruitment point of view, talking about skills rather than qualification actually helps employers widen the talent pool and draw from in terms of recruiting. So if you think about, for example, a company trying to recruit for a specific role, if they put a very specific education requirement attached to it, and that is not vital for that role. So we're not talking about the doctor that needs to work in the hospital where the qualification is vital, but we're talking about, for example, take a marketing role, for example. You might have a degree in marketing, or you may have a lot of work experience in marketing and not have a marketing degree, and you would still be perfectly suitable for the job. And the employer may want to not put that strict education requirement because it doesn't want to restrict the pool of talent that they have access to. So I think this is quite an important context when we try to bridge the gap between employers and education provision, because there is a good reason why employers don't often talk about qualification, which does not mean that qualifications are not important to employers. And in fact, if we dig a little bit deeper behind the job postings numbers and figures, on the previous slides, I presented that 79% of all job postings in the UK do not have any mention of any educational requirements. This number actually goes down a little bit for graduate job postings. So, graduate job postings are all job postings that are for occupations that in the UK SOC taxonomy are classed around number 2 and number 3. So, a SOC 2 or a SOC 3, which is a professional occupation or an associate professional occupation or technician. And for this role, in 73% of cases, employers don't mention any educational requirements. Again, it's still a high number, but is a little bit lower than the wider pool in the labor market. And the other thing that we can see is that in this respect, the number of job postings that specifies a specific educational requirement related to either a bachelor degree or any other type of higher education degree, master degrees or even PhDs, is much obviously higher than in the wider labor market. So if we focus on the higher education, higher technical space, we do see that there is a little bit bigger tendency in terms of recruiting for this type of qualifications, even though the majority of employers still don't mention any particular qualifications. So,
I think, sorry, Elaine, I think that's a really interesting point, though, that you make there. And I think what we're trying to say, I hope people haven't kind of got too despondent so far about the lack of kind of direct line data. Is what we're saying as well is that within each of those qualifications, whether it's a further education qualifier, a degree, an undergraduate, a postgraduate, a higher apprenticeship, there are skills in all those qualifications, and students will gain those skills and gain those life skills as well, and technical skills. The challenge is understanding that and coaching, I think, to an extent, getting those students to talk more about that skills acquisition, that skills competency, that skills capability, and less than that default referral to, well, I've got a degree in this, or I've got a postgraduate degree in this, because the employer really doesn't see the value per se in the title of the qualification, but absolutely sees the value in the skills acquisition that the students are getting through studying that program.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole point. It's about how can we try to bridge the gap in between these different languages that are being used to understand something that's really valuable, because having the right skills and going through the right qualifications that can equip you with the right skills is actually vital to succeed in the labor market. So we are talking about differences in languages here, not about differences in value of specific qualifications. And actually, what we want to do here with the next few slides is try to explore a little bit more this point about qualification, and especially graduate level qualifications, because a lot of the questions that we get asked about many times is from education providers that want to understand a little bit more, okay, but what do employers need? What kind of qualifications do I need to offer in order to meet the local demand, in order to meet business needs? And so one thing that we can do using our data is actually look at that subset of jobs that do specify specific educational requirements and try to understand what kind of requirements they attach to it. So this is a smaller sample from the big number of job postings that we have, because of the numbers we've seen previously about most employers not mentioning educational requirements, but this gives us a very clear picture of the segments of the labor market where specific qualifications are being required. And obviously, the focus of today's webinar is on graduate and higher level qualifications. So on the slides here, you can see a focus on the top occupations that mention bachelor's degree, master's degree, and PhDs, but you could potentially do a similar exercise for A-levels or GCSEs if you were interested in understanding more where demand for these skills or these qualifications is. And what do we see here? So here you see the top 10 occupation where for which the top 10 occupations in which a specific qualification is mentioned in a certain percentage of job postings. So for example, you have the biostatistics managers and director, for which approximately 40% of job postings actually required a specific master degree. And so basically that tells you that of 100% of the job postings related to that specific occupation, over 40% actually specify a master degree. And all in all, the main findings, if you go through all the also other top occupations, so like for example, astronomers is the top occupation requiring a PhD, with more than half of all job postings in that case specifying a requirement for a PhD, and likewise you can have similar example on the bachelor's degree front, with some occupations requiring almost like 70%, 80% of the time a bachelor degree. And this gives you an idea of which parts of the labor market are most likely to require high-level qualifications. And overall, if you want to draw some high-level conclusion from these findings, what we see is that in some particular categories, for example, related to the healthcare, IT, and life sciences, qualifications are still particularly important. So when you start to zoom in certain fields in the labor market, you start seeing a much higher demand for higher qualifications. And then the other way that we can try to answer these questions, where are the graduate qualifications most required, is not just about looking at the frequency overall with which specific qualifications are required, but also at the distribution. So here you see the top 10 occupation where a qualification, a higher level qualification, be that a bachelor, a master, or a PhD, is required. So it is actually the other way around, in the sense that the top occupation, the bottom occupation in this graph, so anthropology and archaeology professor, is actually the occupation where we see the highest share of job postings actually specifying any of these higher level qualifications. So approximately 90% of all job postings related to that qualification require either a bachelor degree, a master degree, or a PhD. And in this case, the PhD is particularly vital. But on the other end, you see that for optometrists, for example, over 70% of them need a higher level qualification. Most of these instead require a bachelor degree, not a master. Because one of the questions that we often get asked is, how much should we invest in undergraduate provision versus graduate provision? And again, this depends on different fields in the labor market, and this is a way to try to assess the differences of the needs in different parts of the labor market. Moving on, one of the other questions that we often get asked is about how can we assess demand? So not just a lot of the time, organization and education providers don't just want to understand which are the occupations where qualifications are most often mentioned, but they also want to understand if there's actually any job opportunity in the labor market related for these qualifications, because it is all well and good to require the specific qualification, but if employers are not recruiting in that field, you're training students for a labor market that doesn't have much opportunity. So a way to actually try to dig a little bit deeper into trying to assess the demand is by combining this measure of frequency with which specific qualifications are being mentioned in a job postings with the total volume of job postings that are available in a given labor market. for different occupation. And this is what we try to do here with this very messy graph, if you want to call it that way. But basically, we try to split occupations into 4 categories based on the amount of job postings that we are seeing in the labor market for that occupation and the frequency with which they require a specific bachelor degree. And again, you can do this similar exercise for other type of qualification based on your interest. And basically what you want to do here to try and understand and assess demand is you want to find those occupations for which a specific qualification is mentioned very often and there is a high volume of job postings. So in this case, for example, this would apply to things like occupational therapist, physical therapist, or in the finance space to audit managers, or, for example, speech language pathologist or psychologist. So in these areas, having a degree is essential, and there are a lot of job postings. So these are the areas that are really needed in the labor market and where having a higher level qualification bring really the most value. Then on the other side, so on the blue side of this graph, what we see are occupations where there is a lot of demand for a specific qualification, in this case for bachelor's degree, but actually the number of jobs that are available in the labor market for these occupations is tiny. So yes, degrees are really important in this space. There aren't many jobs available right now in the labor market that require those qualifications. And then to just finish the tour of the quadrants, going down on the right hand side, we have those job postings, those occupations where there is a high volume of job postings, but there isn't really a mention of a degree. So these are jobs where there is a lot of labor market demand, but they don't really need qualifications. And this, for example, could be related to a lot of jobs that don't require degrees, for example, in business development or in human resources, or in more trades related occupation or like machinist roles. And then the fourth quadrant, of which there's not really much to say about, but those are the occupations where there isn't really much demand for specific qualification, and also there isn't much demand in the labor market overall. So these are the occupations that we can potentially ignore for this kind of exercise, unless we are really interested in one of them to try and assess his demand.
I think the fascinating thing about this graph, though, is the fact that even though we've got those high volume but low mention of degree, again, going back to that point around the ability for educational establishments to work closely with employers, is that there is probably a need for high-level training and high-level skills development within a lot of those roles, but it's not immediately apparent because perhaps the employer doesn't understand the raft of qualifications available. So I always like to think that as a bit of an opportunity graph, in the areas where there isn't a lot of talk around degree or higher level technical quals doesn't necessarily mean that the employer can't see that in the future. And as you mentioned a couple of slides back, AI, the advancement of technology, we're seeing roles evolving more and more frequently where there's more and more need for skills acquisition in roles. So I think that's quite a good graph and an exciting one, putting my positive hat on, in that there's lots of room, I think, for educational establishments to work with employers to flesh out actually what is the development need, the training need in a lot of those roles, and how we can offer those level 4-5 pathways and build that scaffolding up to degree in some of those roles, even though it doesn't necessarily appear as we need it at the minute.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a nice segue on the next slide, which is it actually worth investing into qualifications? And I think it jumps out quite clearly here that the overarching answer is yes, it is worth investing in qualifications and in high-level qualifications, because when we look at the median advertised salary in job postings, we do see that there is quite a premium related to having higher level qualifications. So overall, if we take the job postings that don't mention any education requirements, the median advertised salary that we see is around just over 38K. But there is a wide range there. So when we start looking at the specific qualifications that are being required, we see that the job postings that specifically mention education requirements up to GCSE level tend to offer much lower wages, so around the 28,000 mark. And then if we move on to foundation and higher level technical qualifications, we are around 41,000 median advertised salary for a year. So this is already above the one for no education listed. For bachelor's or equivalent qualifications, so job postings that mention bachelor's or equivalent, we are around 42,500. For masters, we are around 46,000, and for PhD or equivalent at 51,000. So there is value in qualifications, and this is a way in which you can clearly see it also in the data.
Absolutely.
And this is not just something at on the labor market overall as a spectrum, but it's also something that you see within specific occupation. So within the same occupation, somebody that has a higher level of qualification actually commands a higher salary in many cases. Not all cases, there are some exceptions, but this helps kind of understand to which level is worth investing in a specific qualification. So here, there's just a few examples of occupations that typically require higher level qualification, be it a bachelor, master, or PhD. And you can see the median advertised salary for these occupations in job postings that mention one of the three qualifications. And so how do you interpret something like this? Well, let's start with the one that has got the biggest difference and the starkest contrast. If you take a computational biologist in the middle of the chart, what you see is that the median advertised salary for computational biologist job postings that require a bachelor degree is actually quite low. It's below the 30K mark. But for computational biologist job postings that require a master degree, this number shoots up to almost twice as much. So this tells us that there is a lot of value in investing for a master degree in something like computational biologist compared to just stopping at the bachelor degree, for example. Whereas instead, on the opposite scale of the spectrum, if you think about organic chemist, for example, we see that the salary is actually pretty similar in job postings requiring a bachelor, a master, or a PhD. So this can give us some understanding of up to which point is worth investing in qualifications. Then the other big question that we often get asked about is how do we identify new qualifications we should invest in as education providers? So what are the emerging trends in the labor market, and how do we turn them into education provision that can match employers' need? And here, actually, when I think about this question, I actually revert back to skills. And why do I do that? Well, because new trends in the labor market tend to appear as skills first. They're really tiny. They are a niche of a subsector, a niche of a specific occupation. It's a new tool in the same job as before. So it's just a finite amount of skills that are being required to begin with. Then an occupation becomes so important that it shoots up, a skill becomes so important that it shoots up, and it becomes a whole new occupation, and there is a whole new role being created. And so being able to track the specific skills here help us understand what are the emerging trends. The graph that I share here is that of the top 10 emerging digital skills in Europe. It's part of a wider research project that I've been working on recently, and it is publicly available on our website. So if you want to check out more about the latest trends in digital skills activity in Europe, you can do that online after the end of this presentation. But the point here is that by tracking the skills, we are then able to assess what kind of qualifications investments is needed around these skills, these new emerging skills. Because by trying to understand what type of emerging skills or what type of emerging skills clusters or group of skills, we can understand whether the new education provision required is just about a micro credential or a continuous development kind of qualification, or it requires a master degree, 1 year, 2 years of study, or it requires a full-time bachelor undergraduate degree, which requires a lot more time and investment from the part of the student. And then the other thing is that by using job postings data, what you can also do is triangulate these new emerging skills and trying to understand what other skills they often appear together with. So you can see, for example, we see a lot of job postings lately for generative AI. So you might think that this is a new education provision that is worth investing in. But obviously, somebody training in these kind of things does not just need generative AI skills. They probably need a wide range of other skills, both technical and soft skills. And so using job postings data, you can kind of like map the whole profile of skills that are being required alongside the emerging skill, and that can help you design the whole curriculum around the new course provision.
I think that scaffolding is really important, and I'm pleased we talk about digital skills, because we see that's probably the one area where this example that you've put here, we kind of see that happening, and I've seen it happening over the last few years. If you'd have said to me 8 years ago, Amazon Web Services is a skill, it probably wouldn't have been, as an emerging skill. Whereas recently I saw on LinkedIn a college that I used to work at. They've done a skills bootcamp course on AWS as a skill for people in work, and I think that's how quickly and rapid we can see, particularly in the digital world, things like Azure, Python, AWS, and other skills, agile methodology. They seem to be expanding at quite a rapid pace, but the ability to scaffold lots of other things, lots of other skills need around that to be able to create a meaningful course. We're starting to see more and more of that happening, particularly in the digital space. You said life sciences. I found it fascinating how you can track salary and career progression from bachelor to masters in biomedical science and statistics. You can kind of map that across, can't you? It's definitely worth doing a degree and a master's degree and then a PhD, because you can see your career pathway expanding through that.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it ties back nicely to something you were saying at the beginning, Ben, about the fact that 80% of the current and future workforce is already in work today. So we need to be creative about understanding how fast the labor market is changing, how important these business needs are, but also how agile and flexible education provision needs to be to meet these needs.
Absolutely, an ongoing challenge. So in conclusion, to thank Elena for the work that she's done there on that data, and I think a very, very useful insight. And obviously, the start of the presentation hopefully wasn't too doom and gloom for myself around where do we fit into the need. There's lots of evidence there around sectors where it's critical to have undergraduate and postgraduate provision. I think one of the things that we can take away from this is ultimately employers in the main value that skills proposition more highly than the stipulate qualification demand for the vast majority of roles. I think job posting data, skills data is becoming more and more vital in, certainly in the UK, in Europe, in America. We're starting to see more and more conversations between large global companies and ourselves around, or how do we map the skills of our organization? How do we start to develop what our skills strategy needs to be moving forward? And ultimately, how do we start to train people and develop people so they can make the most of this new skills map? So I think there's definitely a piece of work there. And certainly in the work that we do with universities in this country, combined authorities in the UK, and colleges and training providers, it's very much, I think, around how we enhance that relationship with employers an educational establishment. So employer engagement or business development has been a thing for a long time, but I think now it's becoming more and more vital that as educational establishments have our data, that they start to share that data, particularly when we move away from the large multinational employers into the SME world and micro SME world, because they don't always understand the future of their sector and the future of their company. And so I think the opportunity is there for educational establishments to start to use that data to help employers understand how they could evolve their business, how they can evolve their workforce, and build a skills strategy for them to succeed and thrive, and ultimately for the educational establishments to benefit by developing these new courses. There's no question that this data can help unlock those insights. And what is that gap between employer expectation and qualification outcome? I think we can definitely narrow that. And I think, like I mentioned a few slides ago, it's not that employers don't value qualifications, it's that they probably don't understand all the skills and credentials and capability and competency that comes out of a lot of those qualifications. So I think, a big part of what we do in our commercial world, in our company world, is help companies, massive multinational companies, understand that. And I think certainly educational establishments need to start to think about, in the HE world, micro-credentialing, how we start to coach and develop people to talk about that. I also think, and it's a kind of passion point, the last point there for me, I spent a lifetime in education, is there's an emerging need and a real opportunity to develop short, higher technical provision. I think career development is absolutely critical, and those already in work will build the scaffolding for future degree demand. So if you think there's, like we mentioned, that 80% figure a couple of times of the 2030 workforce that are in work, a good chunk of those people will have not necessarily studied at university or studied a higher qual, gone straight into work and believed it's beyond their ability or beyond their reach. I think that short course development, modularisation of degrees, short level 4 and 5 provision will really help engage those individuals in understanding how their career could progress, and will lead them to do either a higher technical apprenticeship or a degree program once they get into that kind of rhythm and flow. And certainly things like the lifelong learning entitlement in the UK will help that. I think that the need now is to focus on how we upskill that current workforce and balance that with the current strategy around, we want to develop a pipeline, a tail of young people that want to work into those technical sectors. We need to balance that with the here and now. And so I definitely think, there's a lot of opportunity there for universities, for training providers that operate at a higher level in terms of qualifications, colleges, to really think about how they partner with employers to start to develop this work. And there's lots of initiatives, like I mentioned, skills boot camps is the start of getting people to think about learning, but there's lots of opportunities through devolution around that. Is there anything else that you wanted to add there, Elena?
No, I think that's a very comprehensive summary of the practical implications. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. So thanks everyone for taking part. A couple of things just afterwards that I want to talk about. So we've got another webinar coming up soon, a fantastic one with our partners at Bath College. So Alex, who looks after our further education clients in the UK, he'll be talking with Sam, the assistant principal at Bath College, around how they've started to embed LMI, the challenges, the wins, the positives around embedding LMI across Bath College, and they'll talk about their access to our platforms as well. There is a wonderful website that's out there at the minute that I would definitely recommend that you look. This is where Elena and colleagues in professional services, how we collaborate with organisations like OECD and World Bank. Last week, Elena was talking in Poland and talking through OECD, their event. We really do collaborate on a truly global level with truly global organisations. And so I think this is a fantastic resource to have a look at. And also a quick one there around the digital skills outlook. So if you log onto that website, we've presented some digital skills reports for a few cities across the world where you can register your details and get the digital skills report for some cities that hopefully are very, very localised to you. And the final bit before we kind of pause there and see any questions that we've got, within our UK customer service teams, I would just a quick reminder, we have our innovation groups. So that's where clients will meet with us and tell us what they want to see out of the data, and we talk about challenges. So we've got a higher education innovation group coming up on the 19th of June. If you're a HE client and you're watching this and you're not registered for that, then please reach out to Carrie and she'll happily add you into that innovation group. And then we've got the one that on the day before for our further education client group as well. And Alex is leading that. So if you're a further education client, get in touch with Alex. If you're watching this and you're not a client, then please reach out to our colleague Carla, because we'd be delighted to also have a conversation with you about how we can help your organization to use this data to kind of improve insights around the job and labour market space. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and then we'll take time now just to look at questions. So thanks ever so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you.